Hello, my name is Max Hansen. I'm a new academic staff member here at the University of Edinburgh. I work in particle physics theory, and specifically my research of interest has to do with quantum field theories, especially non-perturbative quantum field theories, and using numerical methods like lattice QCD to extract some of that interesting non-perturbative information.
Hello, I'm Dylan Robson. I'm finally a PhD student here at the University of Edinburgh, up in the Institute for Astronomy, and I'm studying the X-ray emissions from simulated galaxies using the SIMBA simulations. What inspired you to become a scientist? What was that sort of key kicking off point that made you really think science is where I want to go?
Yeah, absolutely. It is a tough question, but I would say it was probably sort of a series of events in my high school and college education, and probably mainly pushing me in the direction of physics were really inspiring classes. And what stands out is my senior year of high school, the teacher was just incredibly engaged and entertaining, and that left a lasting impression.
That answered the question I was going to ask next. Anyway, I was going to say, what inspired you to not just go into science, but go into physics in particular? But of course, you've said inspiring teachers, which I think is a touch point that a lot of people might have. What was it that took you down the path you're on at the moment in physics? In a similar way, was it sort of the work you did in those areas was particularly inspiring and interesting to you, or was there a more specific event?
And I think the main thing that pulled me in that direction was, first of all, the idea that I found quantum field theory incredibly exciting. And I really wanted to understand it in a very controlled, but also deep way. And I had kind of a sense, if I could understand it well enough to really code it and implement it on a computer, then that would be a very satisfying status to reach. So that was one motivating factor. And then the other was probably, again, individuals and teachers. Yeah. And my PhD advisor, Steve Sharp, when I first encountered him in lectures, that was in graduate school then, I could already see that he was just an excellent teacher and would be an excellent person to interact with over the coming years. So I was very motivated to work with him. Potentially, so I think there are many areas. One that comes to mind is the advances that we're making, again, biased by my field, the advances that we're making in understanding non-perturbative quantum field theories with numerical methods. And in particular, my work is in the theory of the strong force, which is called quantum chromodynamics. And in principle, it's unbelievably rich what is predicted by quantum chromodynamics. So not only sort of basic things like the mass of the proton, but also looking at the entire periodic table of the elements, which elements are stable, which isotopes are allowed, how do these form? Yeah. In principle, all that is contained in this very simple mathematical theory, but it's so hard to get that information out. And so I find the idea very exciting that through computational advances and algorithmic breakthroughs, that this could become more and more accessible, that we could, in some distant future with, smaller devices, we could already calculate something like the proton mass. Yeah. And certainly that could propagate into other fields of interest, because if you have control of a non-perturbative field theory, that can also allow you to describe condensed matter systems and just a huge variety of phenomena. So that would certainly be exciting.
What are your interests outside of physics in particular?
I thought for a long time about becoming a biologist. And I think, again, connecting to this idea of teaching, that was just really the first truly outstanding scientific class that I had, was my high school biology. And so I'm always interested to read articles also in this direction, maybe going even a little bit farther outside of science. My other big hobby really throughout my entire adult life has been music. And I've played alto saxophone for many years. And, in high school especially, I was focused on playing in various jazz ensembles, also trying to learn a little bit of classical music. And I would actually like to get back to that a little bit more. Have had a break in the past few years, but that's definitely been an interest. And maybe if I can mention one more, you already touched on language, and I also find foreign language certainly an incredibly interesting topic.
Music and foreign languages often seem to be quite a common link of interest. There can almost be a musicality to a language you don't know, and it can kind of play into each other. I think they often come together.
Yeah, and I think they also, they require a certain kind of analytic thinking that also fits well to physics. So I do think it's true that the kind of mind that is drawn to physics problems is also drawn to aspects of music and language.
Definitely. Where have you most liked working in your career? So not necessarily place, but also the positions you've worked in.
Certainly my graduate school experience comes to mind. So for me personally, one reason I knew I really wanted to go to graduate school was I could tell, although I had learned so much physics as an undergrad, it felt like it was very attached to the specific classes and to the specific textbooks. And
Yeah.
so I felt comfortable that I could sort of solve certain concrete problems, but I didn't feel like I had a holistic view of physics, that I could, discuss it in an open, loose conversation and explore ideas in new directions without sort of the safe framework of a textbook. And so I really appreciated my time in graduate school for kind of giving me that freedom to discuss ideas and explore ideas in a more open context. And I think it's not a bad structure per se. I mean, this fact that we kind of alternate between being very focused on a specific problem in a specific subfield, it's incredibly important to understand things at that level of detail. And so
Yeah.
sometimes it is important to immerse yourself, and then it's equally important to step back and try to kind of understand the whole physics landscape. And I think the process of going back and forth between the big picture and very focused details, that's really what forms the physicist in the end.
That way of thinking of solving problems, it can often feel, especially when you're taught it in undergrad, like you're saying, you're very much told this is the scientific method. You go through this thing. You might have your hypothesis. You test it. Has it worked? You keep going. And obviously, that's sort of fundamentally what everybody's doing. That when you look at it in this large scale, that is the process. But then having this idea of approaching talking to other people about their separate work and incorporating that. I guess this is all my very rambly way of saying, sort of, does that inspire your approach to research? Has that affected how you research and how you approach research?
Absolutely. I think it's interesting that you bring up the scientific process, because this is also something that we should pursue to some extent, but of course we also challenge it in some ways. And I think certainly in school, you often learn a very simplistic view of the scientific process, where you form a hypothesis and then try to disprove it. And that can be an effective structure, but in reality, research is much more chaotic than that. You're inspired by an idea. Sometimes you can do a calculation very quickly. Sometimes you try to really shift a paradigm. And I think it's this kind of messy environment that is also incredibly productive.
How has moving to Edinburgh during everything that's going on at the moment, how has that been? Have you been able to still experience it in some meaningful way?
Yeah, I mean, I've really only been here for a week and a half, so it's all very recent, but it's been great. The move was surprisingly smooth. I came from Germany at a time where there was no quarantine rule, so I was able to come here without worrying about the quarantine.
Yeah.
And yeah, the main thing I've been doing so far is just biking around the city. And actually, I have to confess, I got very lost a couple of days ago, and as a result, I took sort of an unintended 1 hour tour around various parts, and I was just blown away by, I don't know, the city is much larger than the type of city I'm used to. And I don't know, just the different levels and the winding streets and all of these amazing structures, castles, etc. It seems very cool. So I'm very excited to explore it more in the coming years.
So something that I'm sure lots of PhD students want to hear, especially as it's coming to December for final year students. Is there any particular piece of advice that either maybe you wish you'd had as a PhD student, whether just starting out or just finishing, or even, I guess, better, is there a particular piece of advice that you got that you felt really helped you?
Yeah, I think, I mean, there's certainly many pieces of advice, that I've sort of developed for myself and that were given to me by more experienced people. So one thing I would say is there's so many paths that you can take coming out of the PhD. And I know people who've taken all of these, including more academic paths or going into more industry, technological type positions. And I can just say, I know so many examples of people who have gone all these different routes and have just had a fantastic time with it and flourished with it. So I know it's hard to believe, and I know I personally had trouble believing it, but I would say be aware that there are so many fantastic paths, and don't worry too much about losing something by choosing one of the directions, because in the end, I really see people flourishing in all different avenues. Um, and then maybe as one more piece of advice, if I sort of zoom in on the academic track, which is the one where I have the most experience, I would say it's just incredibly important as you enter the postdoc life, you'll find all of a sudden you have so many ideas of what you want to pursue by yourself. And that's incredibly exciting to transition from being a student, receiving guidance from more senior people, to all of a sudden knowing yourself, I want to do this project, I want to do this calculation. And so I would say, of course, go for that, but also remember not to get lost in your own to-do list, to really always keep interacting with other people in your institution and trying to come up with new directions that are outside of your comfort zone, because those are typically the projects that are really the most exciting in the end.